The bus hissed as it pulled away, leaving Riley standing alone on the dusty edge of a town she didn't even know the name of. Her shoes were soaked from the rain in the last city, her duffel bag torn at the strap, and her arms bruised beneath the sleeves of her jacket. She clutched the bag tighter and turned slowly in place, scanning the quiet street. One diner, a closed hardware store, a feed shop. The world here looked simple, slow, maybe safe. She prayed it was. The sun had started to set, casting long shadows from the low buildings. Her stomach growled loud enough to make her wince. She hadn't eaten since yesterday, just a gas station apple and a bottle of water stolen from the counter when the clerk wasn't looking. She felt the kind of hunger that settled in the bones, cold and deep. Behind the diner, she found a row of trash bins and crouched there, hidden from view. She didn't cry. She had stopped crying weeks ago when she left the first motel, and then the second, always looking over her shoulder. She pressed her back against the wall and let her eyes close for a second. Just a second. Voices startled her awake. She left again, someone said, a woman's voice annoyed. Can't keep anyone around here. Old Colt Wolf's looking for help again. Ranch out past the ridge. Told me he'd even take someone without experience if they can watch the kid and sweep a floor. Another voice replied, he doesn't talk much, that one. Lost his wife, I heard. Keeps to himself. The words faded as the two walked off, but Riley's heart clung to them. Work. A kid. A man who didn't talk much. She stood up slowly, her legs stiff, and moved around to the front of the diner. Through the window, she saw the payphone and fumbled for the crumpled local map she'd found earlier at the gas station. She found the road that led to Wolf Ranch and started walking. The gravel road stretched out like a ribbon into the hills. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of horses and hay. Riley pulled her jacket tighter around her and kept her head down. Every noise in the brush made her flinch, but she kept going. She couldn't go back. She wouldn't. The ranch came into view just as the sky turned purple. A long wooden fence, a wide porch, and a barn bigger than any she'd ever seen. Lights glowed from inside the house, warm and soft. Her feet hesitated at the gate, and for a moment she thought about turning back. What if he was like the others? What if he asked questions? What if he didn't believe her? But then she remembered the woman's voice. Even someone without experience. That was her. No experience. Just desperation. She stepped up to the porch and raised her hand to knock, but froze. Her whole body was trembling. She wasn't sure if it was from fear or the cold or the memory of the last time she'd asked for help. That man had smiled at first, too. The door opened before she could knock. A man stood in the doorway, tall and broad, his face shadowed in the porch light. He wore a flannel shirt, the sleeves rolled up, and his hands were calloused and rough. He didn't say a word, just looked at her. Riley's knees gave out and she dropped her bag. She sank to the porch floor, her voice cracking as she whispered, "Please don't hurt me. I'll work. I can clean. I can cook. I'll do anything. Just don't send me away." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. He didn't move, didn't speak. Just looked down at her with a stillness that felt almost unnatural. Then, quietly, deeply, he spoke. "Come home." That was all. No questions, no judgment. Just 2 words. She stared up at him, unsure if she'd heard right. But the door opened wider, and he stepped aside. Inside, the warm light spilled out onto the porch like a promise. Riley picked up her bag with shaking hands and walked through the door, not knowing what waited for her. Only that, for the first time in a long time, someone had opened it and let her in. The house was warm, filled with the soft smell of wood smoke and something faintly sweet-baked apples maybe, or cinnamon. Riley stood just inside the door, dripping rain onto the polished wooden floor, clutching her bag like a shield. Her eyes darted around the entryway. tracing every line of the room for escape routes, for danger, for signs of the kind of man this rancher might be. But Colt Wolf said nothing. He closed the door behind her and walked past without a word, leaving her to follow if she chose. She hesitated for a breath before stepping forward, her boots squeaking slightly against the floor. Her senses were on high alert, tuned to any sudden movement, any shift in tone, but there was nothing threatening in the way he moved, just slow, steady purpose. He led her into a large kitchen with heavy wooden cabinets and a kettle steaming quietly on the stove. A little girl sat at the table with a pencil in her hand, her legs swinging just above the floor. She looked up when Riley entered, her eyes wide and curious but not afraid. "This is June," Colt said, his voice low and even. Riley swallowed and managed a small nod. "Hi." The little girl blinked, then went back to her drawing. Colt didn't introduce Riley. He didn't ask questions. Instead, he reached into a cabinet, pulled down a clean towel, and handed it to her. "You're wet," he said. She took it, startled by the kindness. "Thank you." He gestured toward the hallway. "There's a room down the hall. You can sleep there tonight. We'll talk in the morning." She waited for the catch, for the price, the expectation. The heavy silence that meant danger was just behind the door, but it didn't come. He turned his attention back to the kettle, pouring 2 mugs of tea, and then walked outside without another word. That night, Riley lay awake on the narrow bed in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. The sheets smelled like cedar and sunshine. Her heart refused to slow. She had no idea why he'd taken her in, what he wanted, or how long she'd be allowed to stay. But for now, the door was closed, locked from the inside, and no one was yelling. In the morning, she woke early, dressed quickly, and walked into the kitchen to find Colt already there. He didn't say good morning. He just handed her a plate of eggs and bread and motioned toward the table. "I can clean," she said as she ate. "Do laundry. Watch your daughter. I'll earn my keep." He nodded once, then pointed out the window. "Barn. Tack room needs cleaning. June'll show you the rest." It wasn't a job offer. It was a fact. She found June outside near the chicken coop, feeding grain to a hen with both hands. The little girl smiled shyly and beckoned Riley over without a word. The two of them moved from chore to chore as the morning passed, sweeping, feeding, folding, and slowly. The fear in Riley's chest began to shift into something quieter. Colt barely spoke, but he watched everything. He worked the land with practiced rhythm, riding out in the mornings and returning with his hands and clothes covered in dust and sun. He never raised his voice, never made sudden movements, and never asked Riley about her past. At first, that silence felt dangerous, like the silence before a storm, but then she started to understand. It wasn't coldness. It was grief. There were photographs on the mantel, one of a woman with long hair and eyes that looked like June's, a wedding photo, sun-bleached and worn. Colt never touched them, but he never moved them either. As if some part of him still waited. One evening, after a long day in the field, Riley lingered on the porch. Colt sat on the steps, his hat low over his eyes, sipping coffee. The cicadas buzzed in the distance. She sat a few feet away, unsure why. "You don't talk much," she said quietly. He didn't answer right away. Then, "Don't have much to say." She nodded. That made sense. "I ran from something," she said after a while, surprising herself. "Someone." Colt didn't look at her. Just took another sip of coffee. "You don't need to tell me," he said. She looked down at her hands. "Aren't you curious?" No. Silence again. But this time, it didn't feel like a wall. It felt like a shelter. For the first time in months, Riley didn't feel like prey. She felt like maybe she wasn't alone. Riley didn't know the exact moment she started breathing easier, but it came somewhere between brushing down a horse with June at her side and folding sun-warmed laundry in the late afternoon light. The fear hadn't vanished, not completely, but it had started to quiet, like a distant radio turned down low. For the first time in years, her days were predictable. Safe. Colt never pried. Never hovered. He gave her space but not distance. He was there always in the background, steady as a mountain. His silence had stopped feeling like a warning and started feeling like a promise. No sudden outbursts. No fists against walls. No threats whispered under his breath. Just work. Chores. The soft sounds of life on a ranch. Riley woke with the sun now. June would shuffle sleepily into the kitchen each morning in her tiny boots, rubbing her eyes and leaning into Riley like she'd always been there. They'd feed the chickens together, water the garden, and sweep the porch. June didn't talk much, but she didn't need to. She showed her affection in other ways, in the way she grabbed Riley's hand without asking, or how she left wildflowers on her pillow after a long day. Sometimes Riley caught Colt watching them from a distance, like he couldn't believe it either. He didn't speak often, but when he did, his voice carried weight. He'd offer simple instructions, quiet thanks, and once or twice a compliment. "You're good with her," he said one evening after Riley had braided June's hair by the fire. Riley had looked up, startled. "I don't know much about kids." "You don't have to. She likes you." Riley had smiled softly. "I like her too." They didn't say anything else that night, but something shifted, slowly. Colt started inviting her into more of the day-to-day work, mending a fence, collecting eggs, riding out to check on the cattle. The first time he helped her up onto a horse, his hands were careful, respectful, like he was afraid of startling her. She didn't flinch. They rode in silence at first, the wind carrying the scent of pine and earth. The sky stretched wide and endless above them. Riley felt something stir in her chest, a strange, unfamiliar lightness. Afterward, Colt helped her dismount and simply said, "You ride well." She hadn't ridden in years. Not since she was a teenager. Not since life had gotten complicated and cruel. But here, it felt like she had time again, space, like she might start to remember who she was before she became someone afraid to speak too loud or move too fast. Still, the nights were hardest. Sometimes Riley woke drenched in sweat, breath coming fast, heart pounding like a drum. In those moments, the shadows in the room seemed to shift and stretch like hands reaching for her. She'd sit on the edge of the bed, arms wrapped around her knees, whispering to herself that she was safe now, that he wasn't here. Once, Colt found her like that. She didn't hear him approach until he was at the door, backlit by the hallway light. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Riley jumped, wiping her face quickly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake anyone." "You didn't." She looked down. "Sometimes I get stuck in it. The memories. The fear. I'm trying to move on." Colt didn't speak. He just stepped inside the room slowly and crouched by the bed. "You don't have to explain anything," he said. "Not to me." She looked at him, really looked at him. There were deep lines around his eyes, sun-weathered skin. A sadness behind his steady gaze that told her he knew something about grief too. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I can see that." He stood up then, stepped back toward the hallway, and paused at the door. "If it ever gets too heavy to carry alone," he said without turning around, "you don't have to." The next morning, there was a steaming mug of coffee waiting for her on the porch swing. No note, no explanation. Just a quiet gesture. And somehow it meant more than 100 spoken words. The fear didn't disappear. But for the first time, Riley believed it might not last forever. There was a new rhythm to life on the ranch. One with quiet mornings, gentle laughter, and long evenings under wide skies. Colt's silence had stopped being a mystery. June's small hand in hers had started to feel like home, and Rayleigh began to wonder cautiously, carefully, if maybe this was the beginning of something she never thought she'd have again: peace. The days had started to blur into something comforting. Wake up with the sun. Feed the animals. Watch June run barefoot through the grass with wild braids and laughter on her tongue. Riley had begun to laugh too, now and then soft, short bursts that surprised even her. There were still shadows under her eyes, but they weren't as deep. The bruises had faded. The flinching had lessened, but healing, she was learning, wasn't a straight line. One Thursday morning, Colt came back from town later than usual. Riley was finishing up dishes, the scent of cornbread still hanging in the air, when she saw him pull his truck into the driveway. He got out slower than normal. His jaw was set, his shoulders tight. Riley stepped outside, drying her hands on her apron. "What is it?" she asked, trying to read his face. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Someone asking around. Tall man, out-of-state plates. Showed your picture to Marty at the feed store." Everything inside Riley turned cold. "No name," Colt added, watching her carefully. "But I figured you'd know who it was." She did. Her legs nearly gave out as she sat heavily on the porch step. "He found me." Colt stayed quiet, but his presence grounded her. She wrapped her arms around herself. "I thought I was careful. I didn't use my real name at the diner. I didn't even tell the bus station where I was headed. He must have tracked the card. Or someone saw me. I don't know." Colt crouched beside her. "You don't have to run again." She stared at him. "You don't understand. He doesn't let go. He's not just cruel, he's smart, manipulative. He talks his way out of everything. Police don't do anything unless there's blood, and even then ... Her voice broke. Colt didn't speak for a long time. "Then, he lays a hand on you or comes on my land again, it won't end with a conversation." The way he said it calm, unshaken, certain sent a tremor down her spine. But not from fear. She nodded, but later that night, she quietly packed a small bag anyway. Just in case. Just in case Colt changed his mind. Just in case it became too dangerous for June. Riley wouldn't let him or that little girl pay for her mistakes. 2 days passed. Then 3. On the 4th day, the man showed up. It was late afternoon. The air was thick with heat and dust, and Riley was hanging laundry while June napped. She heard the sound of tires on gravel and turned. He was standing next to a silver car parked by the gate. Tall, sharp suit. Expensive sunglasses. But she didn't need to see his eyes to know it was him. Her heart stopped. "Riley," he said, too casually, like he'd just run into her at the store. "There you are." She stepped back. "You need to leave. You've made this very difficult," he said, smiling like they were sharing an inside joke. "But we can fix it. Come on, I'll take you home. We'll forget all this nonsense." The word home made her stomach turn. "No," she said, louder this time. "You don't get to call it that." He took a step forward. "Don't be stupid." Then Colt's voice rang out calm, firm, final. She said no. The man turned. Colt stood a few paces behind Riley, one hand resting on the porch post, his stance relaxed but unmovable. "Who the hell are you?" The man snapped. "The man who owns this land," Colt said. "And the one who'll put you flat if you don't get back in that car." The man's jaw tightened, but Colt didn't blink. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't move. That was what made it scarier. Then June stepped onto the porch, rubbing her eyes, calling, "Mama?" Riley's breath caught. The man's head snapped toward the child, eyes narrowing. But Colt moved, then positioning himself in front of both Riley and June in a quiet, protective motion that needed no words. That was when the sirens wailed in the distance. Colt didn't look surprised. Riley glanced at him in shock. I made some calls, he said under his breath. Got some things on record, just in case. When the sheriff pulled up, Colt calmly explained the situation. Riley told the truth with her hands shaking. The man tried to spin his usual charm, but something in Colt's presence, his steadiness, his reputation shut it down. This time the law listened out as they hauled the man away in cuffs. Riley stood frozen. Colt stepped beside her, not touching her, just offering his presence again. You didn't run, he said. No, she whispered. I didn't. And this time she wouldn't. The dust hadn't even settled after the sheriff's car pulled away, but something inside Riley had already begun to shift. She stood on the porch, hands trembling, watching the horizon long after the cruiser disappeared. The man who had once controlled her every step was gone, at least for now. But the aftershock trembled through her bones like an echo. Colt hadn't said much after the arrest. He never did. But he hadn't left her side, either. That night, Riley sat on the porch swing long after June had gone to bed, her small voice still echoing in her ears. Mama? Like the gentlest of anchors, Colt came out with 2 mugs of coffee and sat beside her without a word. I don't think I've ever stood up to him like that, she said, her voice small in the open air. Not really. Not without running. Colt nodded slowly, taking a sip. You didn't run? That matters. Riley stared down at her hands. I'm scared it's not over. He'll find a way to come back. He always does. Colt looked at her then, really looked at her, his gaze steady and quiet. Then we'll be ready. It wasn't a question. It wasn't even reassurance. It was a promise. A few days passed. Life tried to return to normal. June played outside again, chasing the barn cat and drawing pictures in the dirt. Riley cleaned stalls and folded sheets and tried not to jump every time the phone rang. But fear is a stubborn thing. It clings. One night, a truck pulled up near the gate just past sundown. Riley saw the headlights sweep across the window and froze. Blood going cold. Colt was already at the door. Riley followed him out, her heart in her throat, only to find a deputy delivering paperwork, restraining order, formal charges, and an update. Her ex had posted bail. He's not in town, the deputy said carefully. But we thought you should know. Riley barely heard the rest. The edges of her vision blurred as the familiar dread wrapped its hands around her throat. She couldn't breathe. She stumbled back into the house, hands shaking uncontrollably. Colt found her in the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter like it might save her from drowning. I can't do this again, she whispered. I thought it was over. But it never is. I'll never be free. He stepped into the room slowly, giving her space, then stopped a few feet away. You are free, he said, even if he doesn't want to believe it. She looked at him, eyes wet with fear and frustration. He could come back. Tomorrow. Next week. When you're not here. What if he hurts June? What if he hurts you? Colt's voice didn't rise. He didn't shout. But it was firmer than she'd ever heard it. He won't. And there was something in the way he said it, absolute certainty, that made her believe him. Even if only for a moment. That belief was tested 2 days later. Riley was out back with June, hanging laundry when she heard the sound of tires crunching on gravel too slow. Too deliberate. She turned. He was back. No uniform. No warning. Just him, standing outside his truck like he belonged there, like nothing had changed. June clutched her hand tightly. Before Riley could move, Colt was there, walking out from the barn, jaw clenched, eyes sharp. He didn't run. He didn't raise his voice. He just walked right up to the man and stood between him and Riley, a silent wall. You're trespassing, Colt said. You need to leave. Her ex sneered. She's my wife. You think this piece of paper changes anything? She's not your wife. Not anymore, Colt said. And if you take one more step, you'll regret it. There was no bluff in his tone. No hesitation. The man stepped forward anyway. And Colt moved. It happened fast. One solid shove, one warning grip on the arm, and the man stumbled back, caught off guard by the quiet force. Riley heard June whimper and pulled her close. Then came the sound of sirens again. This time, louder, closer. Colt had called them earlier. He hadn't trusted the silence. By the time the deputies arrived, Colt stood calm and still, arms crossed, Riley and June behind him. There were no arguments this time. No second chances. Her ex was taken away in cuffs again. But this time, there was no release. More evidence. More witnesses. Charges that stuck. As they drove him away, Riley felt something new. Not just relief. Closure. That night, she stood on the porch with Colt once more. The stars above stretching wide and silent. You protected us, she said. I always will, he answered. And for the first time, Riley believed that safety wasn't something she had to earn through silence or fear. It was something she'd been given, something she could keep. Autumn came quietly to Wolf Ranch. The leaves on the cottonwoods turned gold, and the early mornings were cool enough to see your breath. The scent of wood smoke drifted through the air, and the horses wore thickening coats. Life slowed a little, softened. Riley stood on the porch one morning, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, a cup of coffee warming her hands. She watched the sun rise over the hills, casting long streaks of light across the field. June was still asleep, curled in her little bed under quilts Riley had mended herself. Inside, Colt was making breakfast, quiet, methodical, just like everything he did. It had been 3 months since the last time she saw her ex. 3 months since the final court hearing, since the sentence had been handed down. He wasn't getting out this time. The law had finally done what it was supposed to. There were restraining orders, a conviction, witnesses, records Colt had helped gather behind the scenes, patiently, silently. But the real healing hadn't come from the courtroom. It had come from the barn in the morning, from June's laughter echoing in the fields, from the way Colt always stood beside her, not in front of her, not behind her, but beside her. He never asked her to forget what she'd been through. He never rushed her. Some nights she still woke up in a cold sweat, memories clawing at the edges of sleep. But now she didn't face it alone. There was always coffee waiting, always Colt's quiet presence in the kitchen, or June's arms wrapping tight around her waist. One morning, Riley found June sitting on the porch steps with a piece of paper in her hand. "What you got there?" she asked, kneeling beside her. June held it up proudly. It was a crayon drawing 3 stick figures, one tall with a cowboy hat, one with long hair, and a little girl between them holding both their hands. The word family was written in big shaky letters at the top. "That's us," June said. Riley felt her throat tighten. "Yeah," she whispered. "That's us." Later that day, Colt came in from the pasture with dust on his boots and sun on his face. Riley handed him a glass of water, and he took it with a grateful nod. "You're good at this," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "What? Handing people water?" "No," he said, quiet smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "All of it, June. The house. This place." Riley looked around. The table she'd sanded down and painted. The clean curtains. The photo of June's drawing now pinned proudly to the fridge. "I didn't think I could ever have this," she admitted. "Not again. Not after everything." Colt set the glass down. "You didn't just have it. You made it." She felt the tears threaten, but they didn't come from pain this time. They came from gratitude, from something full and steady that had replaced the emptiness she used to carry. That night, June asked if Riley could tuck her in. She braided the girl's hair, kissed her forehead. and sang an old lullaby she barely remembered from her own childhood. Afterward, she sat on the porch swing with Colt, their shoulders just barely touching. She called me Mama the other day, Riley said softly. I know, Colt said. I wasn't sure I'd ever hear that. You're hers now, he replied. And she's yours. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the crickets, the creak of the swing, the distant whinny of a horse. Then Riley turned to him. Why did you say it? That first night, when I showed up on your porch, you didn't know me. I was a mess. And all you said was, come home. Colt looked at her, eyes steady as always. Because I know what it's like to lose everything, he said. And I could see it in your eyes you weren't running to something. You were running from something. You didn't need questions. You needed a place to land. Riley leaned her head against his shoulder. The stars above stretched out wide and quiet. I'm not running any more, she whispered. I know. He turned slightly, pressed a kiss to the top of her head. It was gentle, unhurried, true. Riley closed her eyes and smiled, the kind of smile that only comes when you finally understand you're safe, seen, and loved. She had feared that home was something lost, something she'd never find again. But Colt had been right. She hadn't just found it. She'd come home.